Silicon Valley. A place where you practically breathe in innovation. And tech giants, right? They're like, well, modern day castles. But there's a catch, alongside all that coding brilliance and venture capital, there's this shadow, this sky-high cost of living.
Yeah.
And, our listeners, they're curious, like, how do these companies, these tech giants, how do they affect the housing market? So that's what we're diving deep into today. It's going to be pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to look at how this whole region, how it changed over time.
Okay, yeah.
Because Silicon Valley wasn't always about tech.
Oh, really?
It actually, believe it or not, started as like an agricultural hub. Imagine like sprawling orchards
Yeah.
instead of these sprawling campuses.
Yeah.
But companies, right, like
Yeah.
Hewlett-Packard and Intel,
Yeah.
they kind of planted those seeds of change, transformed the whole area into the tech epicenter that we know today.
It's kind of wild to think about, like from fruit to microchips. But as these tech companies grew, obviously they needed all those brilliant minds to, make it all happen.
Yeah.
So what happened when all these highly paid tech workers, what happened when they started moving in?
Well, I mean, you can't really escape, like the law of supply and demand.
Right.
With more people moving in,
Yeah.
right? And not a ton of land. Prices, well, they went up. I mean, think about it. You got companies like Google and Apple
Oh, yeah.
and Meta setting up these huge headquarters, employing tons of people,
Yeah.
and they're paying them a lot.
Yeah.
So that much wealth concentrated in one area, I mean, it has a huge impact, a seismic impact on the housing market. For example, Cupertino, right? Apple's headquarters. Median home price there, well over $2.5 million
Yeah.
for years.
Like, so over 2.5 million, that's not even for a mansion or anything?
Nope, just a regular house.
Wow.
And even if you're not trying to buy, rent isn't a picnic either. Rents for apartments, they can easily top $3,000 a month.
Yeah.
It just shows you how intense this market is, how squeezed it is,
So even if you aren't, the one coding the next big app or whatever,
Right.
this housing crunch, it affects everyone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So has anyone tried to, fix this? Have these tech companies, have they stepped up and offered any solutions?
They've tried, but it's a complicated situation.
Yeah.
Some companies, they're tackling it head on, building those big corporate campuses,
Oh, right.
and they include housing options.
Oh,
Others, they're doing like housing assistance programs for employees,
okay.
like helping with down payments, or even rental subsidies.
So it sounds like they're at least trying to help their employees out, right?
Yeah.
But does that really solve the bigger problem? Like, couldn't that just drive prices up even more?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got to look at both sides.
Oh, okay.
On one hand, yeah, these efforts, they help employees, but there's also the concern that it makes things even less affordable for people who aren't in tech.
Right.
It's a bit of a balancing act.
Okay, so corporate involvement is one piece of this whole puzzle. But what about zoning laws? I'll admit, I don't really understand that whole thing.
Yeah, zoning regulations, they play a huge role.
Oh, okay.
They basically decide like what can be built and where.
Okay.
And in Silicon Valley, a lot of the zoning, well, it favors single-family homes.
Okay.
That really limits how much housing can be built.
So even if there's land, developers can't build apartments or condos because of these zoning rules.
Exactly. It's a bottleneck.
Wow.
To get more affordable options, we need different types of housing, apartments, townhomes, mixed-use developments. But the zoning regulations, they're in the way.
So changing these zoning laws, that could be like the key to unlocking more affordable housing.
It could be.
I bet there's a lot of pushback against that, though.
Oh, for sure.
Who wants to keep things the way they are?
It's about people, right? Their feelings. Existing residents, they might worry about changes to their neighborhoods,
Right.
more traffic, impact on schools, even just, the whole feel of their community.
Yeah.
It's important to think about those concerns, even while we're trying to figure out how to get more housing.
Those are valid concerns. Change can be scary.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to where you live.
Yeah.
But is it fair to, prioritize those concerns over the needs of people who can't even afford a place to live?
That's a tough question.
It seems like a really tough balancing act.
It is. And that's where tech companies, they have a big role to play.
Okay.
They have the power, the resources. They could push for policies that help everyone, not just their own employees.
So it's not just about, fancy campuses and perks for their workers.
Right.
They need to step up and advocate for real change.
Yeah. They have a platform, a voice. They could be the ones pushing for zoning reform, working with the government and community groups to find solutions.
That sounds like a massive task,
It is.
requiring a ton of collaboration and compromise. But before we jump into those solutions, let's talk about something you mentioned earlier, remote work. It's a hot topic these days. How does that play into the whole Silicon Valley housing situation?
Remote work, it could be a game changer.
Okay.
What if people in tech, they didn't have to be in Silicon Valley anymore?
Right.
What if they could work from anywhere?
Yeah.
What would happen to the housing market? The demand might drop. Prices could stabilize.
So instead of everyone crammed into this one expensive place,
Right?
people could spread out, live in more affordable areas, but still work in tech.
Exactly.
That sounds, I don't know, almost too good to be true. Are there downsides to that?
Well, there are always trade-offs.
Yeah.
One thing to think about is what happens to Silicon Valley itself?
Okay.
If a lot of people leave, what happens to that energy, the vibrancy?
Right, right.
Does it hurt the local economy, the sense of community?
Yeah.
Silicon Valley thrives on that in-person stuff, collaboration,
Yeah.
creativity.
Yeah.
But maybe remote work forces us to rethink how and where work happens. Maybe the future isn't about everyone being physically present in Silicon Valley. Maybe it's about a more distributed network of talent.
Interesting. So instead of one central hub,
Right.
we might see multiple tech hubs popping up, each with its own unique vibe.
Yeah.
It's possible. That's kind of a cool vision. But let's be realistic. Will tech companies really embrace remote work completely? I feel like there's been some pushback against that.
Oh, there definitely has.
Yeah.
Some companies, they want everyone back in the office.
Yeah.
Worried about, collaboration, company culture.
Right.
Others are trying this hybrid approach,
Hmm.
a mix of in-person and remote.
It seems like we're still figuring out, like, the long-term impact of all this.
Yeah, we are.
But remote work, it's definitely a wild card that could change everything.
For sure. And it's a trend to watch.
Yeah.
The decisions these tech companies make in the next few years, they'll have huge consequences, not just for them, but
Yeah.
for everyone.
Yeah, they have the power to shape not just where people work, but where they live, where they
Yeah.
build their lives.
That's right.
It's a lot of responsibility, but it's also a chance to create a better future, more equitable, more sustainable.
Absolutely. And it's not just on them, it's on all of us.
Yeah.
Governments, policymakers, residents, everyone. We have to work together to solve this.
Yeah.
We need to be willing to change,
Yeah.
to create a Silicon Valley that works for everyone, not just a select few.
That's a great point. We all have a stake in this. But let's dive into some of those potential solutions. We've talked about zoning reform and remote work. What else is out there? What are some of the most promising ways to create a housing market in Silicon Valley that's actually sustainable?
Well, one idea that's gaining traction is microhousing.
Microhousing. Okay, now I'm really interested. I've heard the term, but I don't really get it. What is that exactly, and how would that help make Silicon Valley more affordable?
So picture this. Compact apartments. Sleek. Often less than 400 square feet.
Oh, wow, okay.
Designed for efficiency. Minimalist living.
Okay, yeah.
It's about taking those underutilized spaces in cities and turning them into these vibrant, self-contained communities.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, but who is that type of housing for? And how does it help with affordability?
It's for a lot of different people. Young professionals, artists, people who want to live in the city but can't afford it, people downsizing maybe, looking for a more sustainable lifestyle. And because they're smaller, these units are cheaper to build and rent. It gives people an alternative to those crazy high rents and mortgages.
So it's about trading space for affordability, but with smart design and community living.
Yeah, exactly.
I could see that being appealing to some people, especially in a place like Silicon Valley where the cost of living is, well, insane. But what about those concerns people have about density and overcrowding? When we talk about new housing, you always hear that. How does microhousing address those issues?
That's really important. Microhousing has to be planned and designed carefully. These projects, they need to prioritize community spaces, green areas, access to amenities, things like that.
Right, right.
It's not about cramming people into tiny boxes. It's about building vibrant, livable communities that meet people's needs.
That makes sense. It's fascinating to see all these different approaches people are trying.
Yeah.
From microhousing to corporate involvement, it seems like everyone's searching for a piece of the solution. But is it enough?
Right.
Are these efforts really making a difference, or are we just putting Band-Aids on a much bigger problem?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
A lot of these initiatives, they're good, but they're often addressing the symptoms, not the root cause.
Okay, so let's get to the root of it then. What are the underlying issues that need to be fixed if we want to create real, lasting change?
At its core, the housing crisis is this complex mix of factors.
Hmm.
Zoning laws, limited land, economic forces driving up demand. It's a lot. We need to address all of it.
So we're talking about a major overhaul, a total rethinking of how we do housing in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, pretty much.
Where do we even begin with that?
We start by acknowledging that housing, it's not just a thing you buy or sell. It's a basic human right.
Okay.
We have to understand that.
Yeah.
A healthy society, it needs different kinds of housing. Affordable housing.
So it's not just about building more housing, it's about building the right kind of housing.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it needs to be in the right places. And it has to be affordable for people who need it most.
That makes sense.
That means rethinking our zoning regulations, encouraging the development of affordable housing, and investing in public transit.
Right, to connect people to jobs and opportunities.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It is. But before we get too far into that, I'm curious about the role of tech companies in all this. We talked about their influence, their resources.
Hmm.
Can they actually be part of the solution, not just contribute to the problem?
They can. They have a chance to really make a difference. They can advocate for policy changes, invest in affordable housing projects, even try out innovative housing solutions on their own campuses.
Oh, right.
And they could set an example by embracing remote work.
Yeah, to lessen the pressure on the housing market.
Exactly. It's their opportunity to redefine their relationship with the community, to be real partners in creating a more just and equitable Silicon Valley.
So it's about more than just shiny campuses and employee perks.
Right. It's about understanding that their actions have a huge impact on the entire community.
But what about the people who are struggling right now? What can they do?
Well, even while we're waiting for systemic change, individuals can do things.
Okay.
They can get involved with local officials, support groups, fighting for affordable housing. They can explore alternative options like co-living or micro-housing.
So even though the situation feels huge, there are things individuals can do.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of Silicon Valley.
That's a good reminder. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, we should talk about that brain drain issue. What happens when talented people are forced to leave because they can't afford to live here? What can be done to stop that?
It's a big problem for Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
When talent leaves, the region loses its edge. It's not just about companies having trouble filling positions. It affects the whole local economy.
So it's not just tech companies that suffer?
No, everyone feels it. Restaurants, shops, the housing market itself, it's a cycle.
Wow.
And it's not just about the economics, it affects the culture too.
Oh, yeah.
Silicon Valley loses its diversity.
Right.
It becomes a place only for the wealthy. And that hurts everyone.
So it's a cultural and social issue as much as an economic one.
Definitely. And it's not just about the people who leave. Those who stay, especially lower-income families, they face longer commutes, less access to services, and a lower quality of life overall.
So it's a lose-lose for a lot of people.
It is, but it doesn't have to be this way.
Okay, so how do we stop the brain drain? How do we make sure Silicon Valley stays a place where innovation thrives?
One way is to focus on building more affordable housing for people in high-demand fields,
Oh,
like teachers, nurses, tech workers. Keep those essential people in the community.
makes sense. But what about people who are already feeling the pressure? People who are thinking about leaving?
Companies can offer better relocation packages, include housing assistance, things like that,
Okay.
to help people offset those high costs.
So make it financially possible for them to stay.
Yeah, but it's not just about money.
Right.
People are drawn to Silicon Valley for the lifestyle, the culture. So we need to invest in public transportation, parks, arts, and culture. Make it a fun, vibrant place to live.
So it's about creating a place where people want to be. Not just work, but live and play too.
Exactly. A community where everyone feels valued and supported, no matter what they do or how much they make.
It's a great goal, but it seems hard to achieve.
It is, but it's not impossible.
Are there any success stories out there, places that have tackled this housing crisis and still kept their unique character?
Oh yeah, look at Vienna or Singapore. They've kept housing costs down while maintaining a high quality of life. And closer to home, Seattle and Portland are trying new things with zoning and density. They're showing that you can build more housing without ruining what makes a place special.
That's encouraging. So it can be done.
It can.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the human side of this housing crisis, I have one more question for you. What about the emotional impact, the psychological toll this takes on people? I know we've talked about the economic and social effects, but I'm curious about that personal experience.
It's a really important part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
The housing crisis isn't just about numbers. It's about people's lives, and it affects them deeply.
Right.
Imagine the stress of constantly worrying about money, whether you can pay your rent, whether you'll be evicted.
That must be incredibly stressful.
It is. And for families with kids, it's even worse. They worry about uprooting your kids, moving them away from schools and friends.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine trying to create a stable home life when you're constantly worried about where you'll be living next.
It is. And it's not just about the money. People feel like they're being pushed out of their own community.
Yeah.
They don't belong anymore.
So it's a sense of loss, of grief.
Yeah. And for people who stay, they see their community changing around them, becoming less affordable, less familiar. And it can lead to resentment, frustration.
So it's a whole mix of emotions: stress, anxiety, sadness, anger.
It is. And it's not just a temporary thing. Studies show that this kind of chronic housing instability can actually make people sick. It's linked to higher rates of depression, anxiety, heart disease, even stroke.
There's a public health crisis, too.
It is. And it's why we need to address the emotional and psychological needs of people, too, not just the practical need for a roof over their heads.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not enough to just give someone a place to live. We need to make sure they feel supported, safe, that they have the resources they need to cope. But how do these emotional challenges play out differently for different groups of people? Are there specific things seniors face, or families with children, or immigrants?
Every group has its own unique set of challenges.
Okay.
For seniors, losing a home is particularly difficult.
Yeah.
It often represents a lifetime of work and memories.
It's not just about finding a new place to live.
No, it's about losing a place that holds so much meaning. And for families with kids, constantly moving is disruptive to their education and development.
And for immigrants?
They face language barriers, discrimination, and just a general lack of familiarity with how things work here.
Right.
They might be afraid to report problems or ask for help because they're worried about their immigration status.
That makes it even harder for them.
It does. And this crisis, it doesn't affect everyone equally. People of color, low-income families, immigrants, they're the ones who are hit the hardest.
So it's not just a housing crisis, it's a crisis that makes existing inequalities even worse.
Exactly. We need to find solutions that are fair. Solutions that prioritize the people who need help the most.
That's a good point. But with all these challenges, are there any stories of hope? Are there examples of people coming together, helping each other out?
Oh, there are tons.
That's good to hear.
People are showing amazing resilience. There are tenants' rights groups fighting evictions and demanding more affordable housing. We're seeing more cooperative housing models where people own and manage their buildings together. And even just neighbors, helping neighbors, people sharing resources and offering support.
That's inspiring. It's good to know people are coming together.
Yeah, it's really heartwarming to see.
But we can't forget about the bigger picture,
Right.
the systems that are creating these problems in the first place.
Absolutely. We need to address those too. At the heart of this crisis is a fundamental question. Is housing a human right, or is it just another thing you buy and sell?
Right. That's a big question.
It is. If we see housing as a commodity, affordability will always be a problem. But if we see it as a human right, then we have to make sure everyone has access to safe, affordable, and stable housing.
That's a big shift in how we think about housing.
It is, but it's a necessary shift.
But how do we get there? How do we move away from this mindset of scarcity and competition and embrace the idea of abundance and cooperation?
It's a process. It takes time. We need to change our laws, our policies, and our hearts. We have to recognize that we're all connected, that everyone deserves a place to call home.
It's a beautiful vision, but it seems like a long road ahead.
It is. But it's a road worth taking. And there are people all over Silicon Valley, all over the country, who are working towards that vision.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our discussion, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked about the problems, the solutions, and the impact this crisis is having on real people. What do you think the future holds for Silicon Valley? Can this region, known for innovation, can it solve this problem? Can it create a better future for all its residents?
It's the question we all have, right? The challenges are huge, but so is the potential. There are so many people, so many organizations working hard to find solutions.
So there's hope.
I think so. I really do. This won't be easy, but if any place can figure this out, I think it's Silicon Valley.
You know, it's so easy to get lost in all the data, the zoning laws, the housing policies, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We're really talking about, like, people's lives,
Right.
right? Their homes, their communities, their dreams. I want to hear more about that human side of things, those stories of what it's like to live in Silicon Valley with this, this crazy housing situation.
It's really tough to see the impact it has on individuals, on families. Imagine being a teacher
Mm-hmm.
or a nurse, a service worker. You're dedicating your life to this community, but you can't even afford to live here.
Right. That's going to be so frustrating.
It is. These are the people who keep Silicon Valley running. But they have to commute for hours,
Yeah.
uproot their families, sometimes even give up on their dreams.
It's like a loss for everyone, isn't it?
It really is.
The community loses its diversity. Families are pushed out. It just doesn't feel right.
And it's not just those lower income folks either. Even middle-class families, young professionals, they're feeling the squeeze.
Yeah. It's tough for everyone.
Owning a home, I mean, that used to be the dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now, for a lot of people, it just feels impossible. They're stuck paying these crazy rents. They can't save up for a down payment.
It makes you wonder if Silicon Valley can even sustain itself,
Yeah, it's a valid concern.
If the people who make it work can't afford to live here, what happens next?
Silicon Valley has always attracted the best and brightest.
Right, right.
But if the cost of living keeps going up, will people still want to come here?
Maybe they'll start going to other tech hubs, places where they can actually afford to live.
It's possible. We might see a brain drain.
And that would be bad for everyone.
Yeah, it's a critical moment for sure.
I mean, what can we do? How do we fix this?
You have to make some choices. Choices that will decide if Silicon Valley can stay on top and also be a fair and equitable place to live. It's a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible.
Okay.
We talked about some solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Zoning reform, remote work, micro-housing. But in the end, it comes down to our leaders. They need the will to actually make changes. Changes that put people ahead of profits.
That's a big ask.
It is.
But it's the right thing to do.
It is. We have to remember that housing is a human right. It's not just something to be bought and sold. We need to make sure everyone in Silicon Valley has a chance to thrive.
And that means having a place to live.
Exactly. We need to build a Silicon Valley that values community and sustainability. A place where everyone feels like they belong.
We've thrown out a lot of ideas: zoning reform, affordable housing, remote work, micro-housing. But those aren't magic bullets, right?
No.
What works in one place might not work somewhere else.
Exactly.
Every community in Silicon Valley is different. They have their own unique challenges and opportunities.
Right. A one-size-fits-all solution just won't cut it.
Yeah.
We need to tailor our approaches to each community.
So it's about finding what works best for each specific place.
Yeah. And it's about listening to the people who live there, getting their input.
Okay, so how do we make sure those conversations are happening? How do we bring together policymakers, developers, and the people who are actually affected by these decisions? I feel like there's a disconnect there sometimes.
That's where community engagement is so important.
Okay.
We need to create opportunities for dialogue,
Right.
spaces where everyone can come together and share their perspectives. Think about town hall meetings, community forums, online platforms where people can voice their concerns and ideas.
So it's about creating a sense of ownership, right?
Yep.
Making sure everyone feels like they have a say in what happens in their community. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. What else do we need to create a housing system in Silicon Valley that's actually sustainable?
Well, we need more housing options,
Okay.
and not just single-family homes.
Mm.
We need apartments, townhouses, condos, mixed-use developments. We have to cater to all different kinds of lifestyles and income levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. But more housing doesn't automatically mean affordable housing, right? How do we ensure that these new homes are actually within reach for people?
That's where policies like inclusionary zoning and rent control come in.
Okay.
Inclusionary zoning means that developers have to set aside a certain percentage of units in new buildings for low and moderate income households. And rent control helps to prevent landlords from raising rents too much. It helps to keep people in their homes.
I know those policies can be pretty controversial, though. There are a lot of different opinions about whether they actually work.
You're right. There are definitely pros and cons to each approach. Critics of inclusionary zoning say it can discourage development, while supporters point to the success it's had in creating more diverse communities. And with rent control, some argue it protects tenants, while others worry it could lead to less investment in rental properties.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, finding the right balance for each community takes careful consideration and a willingness to try new things.
But those changes take time, right?
They do.
And people need help now.
You're right.
So what can we do in the short term?
We need to invest more in rental assistance programs. These programs provide direct financial help to families who are struggling to pay their rent. It helps them stay in their homes and avoid eviction.
That sounds like a critical safety net.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's a temporary fix.
Okay, so what are longer-term solutions? What are some of the more proactive things we can do to create more affordable housing?
One promising idea is community land trusts.
Community land trusts. I
Yeah,
haven't heard of that.
they're nonprofits that buy land and then lease it to homeowners or developers at below market rates.
So the community owns the land.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it helps keep housing affordable over the long term. We're also seeing more modular construction. That's where homes are built in a factory and then assembled on site.
Oh, interesting.
It can speed up construction and lower costs.
So technology could be part of the solution.
It definitely has a role to play.
We're talking about Silicon Valley after all.
Right. Technology has contributed to the problem in some ways, but it can also help us solve it.
Okay, so how is tech being used to tackle the housing crisis?
Well, for one thing, it's helping to streamline the permitting process.
Okay.
That can be a real nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
But new software platforms are making it easier and faster to get new housing projects approved.
So less bureaucracy.
Exactly.
That's great.
And we can use data analytics to better understand the problem. Like, where is the need for affordable housing greatest?
Oh, right.
What kind of housing do we need? How do we connect people with the resources they need? Data can help us answer those questions.
It's about using information to make smarter decisions.
Exactly. And technology can also help people find affordable housing options. There are online platforms that connect low and moderate income families with available units, subsidies, and support services.
So it's about empowering both the people who need housing and the people who are trying to provide it.
Exactly.
But technology alone can't solve this problem.
Right. It's just a tool.
We need to remember the human element, the compassion, the empathy. This is about people's lives.
You're absolutely right. Technology needs to be used in a way that benefits everyone.
Okay, so what about the people who already have stable housing?
Right.
What can they do to help?
There are lots of ways to get involved.
Okay.
They can volunteer their time, donate to organizations working on affordable housing, even just educate themselves and others about the issue.
So even if you're not personally affected by the crisis, you can still make a difference.
Absolutely. We all have a responsibility to help create a more equitable Silicon Valley.
But before we wrap up this conversation, I want to circle back to that brain drain issue.
Yeah.
We talked about how talented people are leaving Silicon Valley because they can't afford to live here.
Right.
What are the real consequences of that? And what can we do to stop it?
When people leave, it hurts the entire region. Companies struggle to find qualified employees. Innovation slows down. The local economy weakens. And Silicon Valley loses its diversity. It becomes less vibrant, less interesting, less of a magnet for talent.
So it's a downward spiral.
It can be.
Mm-hmm.
But we can reverse it.
Okay, so how do we keep those brilliant minds here? How do we make sure Silicon Valley stays a place where innovation thrives?
One way is to create more affordable housing options that are specifically for people in high-demand fields.
Oh, okay.
Think about dedicated housing for teachers, nurses, tech workers, people who are essential to the community. Companies can also offer relocation packages that include housing assistance.
To help offset the cost of living.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that people are drawn to Silicon Valley for more than just jobs. They want a good quality of life. So we need to invest in public transportation, parks, arts, and culture, things that make a place enjoyable to live in.
It's about creating a place where people want to be, not just work, but live and play. A community where everyone feels valued and supported.
That's the goal.
It's a big goal.
It is. But I believe it's achievable.
Are there any examples of places that have successfully tackled similar challenges?
There are. Look at Vienna, Austria, and Singapore. They've implemented some innovative housing policies that have kept housing costs in check while maintaining a high quality of life. And closer to home, cities like Seattle and Portland are experimenting with new approaches to zoning and density. They're showing that it's possible to create more housing options without sacrificing livability.
It's good to know that there are models out there that work. It gives me hope that we can find solutions here in Silicon Valley too. But I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional toll this crisis is taking on people.
Absolutely.
We've talked about the economic and social impact, but what about the psychological and emotional burdens?
The housing crisis isn't just a numbers game. It's a deeply personal experience. Imagine the constant stress of wondering if you'll be able to make rent, the anxiety of potentially being evicted, the sadness of having to leave your home and community. It takes a toll on people's mental and emotional well-being.
It sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. And for families with children, it's even harder. They worry about the impact on their kids' education, their social lives. The constant upheaval can be really tough on children.
It must be hard to create a sense of stability for your kids when you're constantly worried about where you'll be living next.
It is. And for immigrants, the challenges are compounded by language barriers, cultural differences, and sometimes even fear of deportation. They may be hesitant to report problems or ask for help, which makes them even more vulnerable.
So we're not just talking about a housing crisis, we're talking about a crisis that affects people's mental and emotional health.
Exactly. We need to address both the practical and the emotional needs of the people who are struggling.
So it's not just about putting a roof over someone's head, it's about providing support and resources to help them cope.
Absolutely. We need to create a system that recognizes housing as a human right, not just a commodity.
It's a big shift in thinking, but it's a necessary one.
It is. We need to start seeing housing as essential for human dignity and well-being.
But that's a big challenge. How do we get there?
It takes a collective effort. We need to change our policies, our practices, and our mindsets. We need to work together to create a Silicon Valley where everyone has a place to call home, a place where everyone can thrive.
That's a beautiful vision, but it seems like a long road ahead.
It is, but it's a journey worth taking. And there are people all over Silicon Valley and all over the country who are already working towards that vision.
It's good to know we're not alone in this fight.
We're not. And together, I believe we can create a more just and equitable future for everyone.
You know, we've really dug deep into the mechanics of this housing crisis, zoning, policies, all those potential solutions. But I think it's important to remember the human side of it all. This isn't just, some abstract problem.
Right.
This is affecting people every day, right now. And I'm really curious about the emotional impact, the psychological toll this whole thing takes on people. What's it like to live through this?
It's something we don't talk about enough,
Yeah.
really. I mean, everyone focuses on the money, the economics. But the emotional burden, it's huge. It's real. Think about it. Constantly worrying about money, whether you can pay the rent, the fear of eviction.
Yeah, that's got to be so stressful, just always hanging over you.
It is. And for families, it's even harder. Imagine having to tell your kids you might have to move again,
Yeah.
uprooting them from their schools, their friends. It creates this feeling of, instability, uncertainty. That's really tough on kids.
It really is. It's heartbreaking. But it's not just the financial stress, is it? It's also the feeling of being pushed out of your own community, like you don't belong anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Leaving your home, your neighborhood, it's a real loss. People feel that deeply. It's like losing a part of themselves. And even for people who stay, they see things changing all around them. Their community becomes more expensive, less familiar. It can lead to resentment, anger, frustration.
So it's like this whole mix of emotions people are dealing with: stress, anxiety, sadness, anger, all at the same time. It's a lot.
It is. And it's not just temporary. These feelings, they stick with you. There's research showing that this kind of chronic housing instability, it's actually bad for your health.
Really?
Higher rates of depression, anxiety, even physical problems like heart disease, stroke.
So it's not just a housing crisis, it's like a public health crisis, too.
It is. We have to address that. We can't just focus on giving people a place to live. We also need to offer support, resources, help people cope with the trauma of going through all this.
So it's about treating the whole person, not just the housing situation itself.
Exactly. But the thing is, everyone experiences this crisis differently. Seniors face different challenges than families with kids, for example. Immigrants have their own unique struggles.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are some of the specific challenges these groups face?
For seniors, losing a home, it can be devastating.
Yeah.
For many, their home represents their life's work, their memories. It's not easy to just pack up and start over at that stage in life.
It's more than just finding a new place to live. It's losing a part of yourself.
Right. And families with kids, well, they're constantly worried about the impact of all this moving on their children. Will they be able to stay in the same school, make lasting friendships? That uncertainty is tough on kids.
Yeah. It's got to be hard to create a sense of stability for them when you're always worried about where you're going to live next.
And for immigrants, it can be even harder. They're often dealing with language barriers, discrimination. They might not know how the housing system works here. And some are afraid to ask for help because of their immigration status.
That makes them incredibly vulnerable.
It does. And this is why we have to remember that this crisis doesn't affect everyone equally. It's the people who are already marginalized, people of color, low-income families, immigrants. They're the ones who suffer the most.
So it's not just about solving the housing problem, it's about addressing these inequalities, too.
Exactly. We need solutions that are equitable. Solutions that focus on the people who are most in need.
It's a lot to consider. But amidst all this, all these challenges, are there any, glimmers of hope? Stories of people coming together to support each other, finding creative ways to make things better?
There are. All over Silicon Valley, people are showing amazing resilience. There are tenants' rights groups organizing to fight evictions, demanding more affordable housing. There's a growing interest in cooperative housing, where residents share ownership and decision-making. And beyond the organized efforts, there are countless acts of kindness and generosity every day.
That's good to hear.
Neighbors helping neighbors. Communities coming together to support families facing eviction. It's a reminder that even in the toughest times, people can still come together and help each other.
It really is inspiring. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Silicon Valley housing crisis, I think it's important to, step back and look at the big picture. We've covered a lot, the complexities, the potential solutions, the human cost. Where do we go from here? What does the future hold for Silicon Valley? Can this region, known for innovation and problem solving, can it actually solve this? Can it create a future where everyone has a place to call home?
That's the question, isn't it?
That's a huge
Challenge. But there are a lot of people working hard to find solutions. People who are passionate about making things better.
So there's hope.
I think so. I really do. It won't be easy, but I believe Silicon Valley can find a way. We have the resources, the talent, the drive. We just have to work together and never give up.
That's a great message to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas, inspired some action, and left you feeling hopeful about the future of Silicon Valley. We all have a role to play in creating a more equitable and sustainable community for everyone.